Every time I see it, my
Conversion.
brain
Right.
wants to say conversion. So I'm just
No,
going through
I
the
appreciate you.
whole
That's a
picture again.
completely different title, by the way. So
Yeah, right. It can be
you know
something
what I mean? It
different.
could work, but it's
Like,
not what I'm doing over there. Yeah,
right. It's not, and that's not what you meant when you titled it.
that's right.
So, so I'm gonna try that again.
Sure.
Hello, poets of the internet. I'm Diesel Carson, and this is Eponymous, a segment of the Old Word podcast that is interested in poets, their collections and title poems, and how they find their ways into our hands. Today's episode is on Room Swept Home by Remica Bingham-Risher. Remica Bingham-Risher is a Cave Canem Fellow and faculty member, an Afro-Latin poet, and a member of the Wintergreen Woman Writers Collective. She is the author of Conversion, winner of the Naomi Long Magic Poetry Award, What We Ask of Flesh, and Starlight and Air, winner of the Diode Editions Book Award. Her memoir, Soul Culture, Black Poets, Books, and Questions That Grew Me Up, was published by Beacon Press. Her newest book, Room Swept Home, won the LA Times Book Prize. Remica, hello.
I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation.
Oh, please. I mean, really, I was super excited. And I have to say on record, you read all those lovely accolades, but we haven't spoken since you won a pretty large prize. Is that the
Yes,
case?
that is the case.
Am I
Yes,
remembering that correctly?
that is
And that
correct.
prize was?
The Ruth Lily
That's
was my
right.
biggest thing. Yeah.
That's what I was talking about. Is there something else? Well, listen, break the news.
No,
But
Ruth Lily is definitely the biggest one since
that's right.
then.
Amazing. Congratulations, poet.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, but try to keep the work going.
I'm on
Uh,
it.
try to keep it fueled, but I keep myself fueled by reading poets like you. So it keeps me going. I mean, I've been super enthralled by Room Swept Home ever since you talked about it at AWP. And so it's kind of like one of those books where I'm like, oh, I kind of need everyone to read this. Because you're doing so much cool stuff in this book. And it's such a deeply, from what I'm reading, it's a deeply personal book. I mean, I know you have so much of your, I try not to make assumptions, but I think the whole conceit of the
No,
book
you
is
would be
that. So
correct in that assessment. Yes, absolutely. It's a book about my grandmother, so it's deeply personal in kind of every way, and that puts a different spin on things.
yeah, I'm sure. And there's so much work in the archive that I want to talk about later of what you're doing. But first, the first thing I want to talk about is your title poem, Room Swept Home. It's this nice, almost quiet puzzle that comes at the end of the collection, which I thought was really interesting. And I was wondering if you can maybe just talk a little bit more about the book's placement and the form for it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so interesting. Even though it's a really simple poem, a lot of people miss that it's a puzzle. So I'm so glad that you got that right off the bat. There's so many different forms in this work. I don't know if I think of myself as a formalist, but I am a poet who loves form.
Hmm.
And so, interestingly enough, Room Swept Home is it's the oldest poem in this collection.
Oh, wow.
When I wrote the poem, though, I had no idea that this would be the collection. I was really just kind of thinking about all the things that my aunts had taught me, and particularly an aunt that this book is dedicated to, my Aunt Evelyn, who is the child of Mary when we start talking about the book. But this is her first child that she had, and she was sent to the asylum shortly after. But my Aunt Evelyn, we've been a lot of things, but rich ain't one of them. So we've been broke for a
Hmm.
long time. And I remember going to her house as a teenager and seeing her sweep the dirt on her front porch, sweep lines
Hmm.
of the dirt. She didn't have nothing else, but she was going to keep it clean.
Yeah.
And so that kind of shows up as part of Room Swept Home. And it just reminded me, like, whatever we have, these women, particularly these matriarchs in the family, tell me, you care for what you have, no matter what it is, right? And you keep it up as best you can. And particularly, your faith on the things surrounding
Hmm.
it, keep it up as best you can.
Yeah.
And so that's where the idea for that poem came from. And all of the imagery is physical imagery from Norfolk, Virginia, where I was just moving at the time, and where my aunts lived, and where a lot of the things in the book take place. So I was getting used to the space. and trying to remind myself all the things they wouldn't let me forget. And that's how the poem emerged. And strangely, I started calling the book Room Swept Home long before I ever knew really what it was.
Nice. Yeah, because one of my next questions was going to be if the name for the collection like immediately jumped out of you, or was it something you kind of rediscovered when you were going back through your poems?
No, in my mind, because I had written that poem and I knew in my mind it was kind of about what these women gave me. When I
Mm,
started writing these poems about my two grandmothers, that whole endeavor was about what these women gave me.
mm.
So there was already a connection there, but it's strange for me. Titles are not easy, especially titles of manuscripts. My goodness. But there was it really, and there was something about the sound and the wordplay that happened with these kind of three one syllable words pushing up against each other, but also the double entendre that happens when we're talking about keeping something clean and then sweeping something under the rug,
Yeah.
folks don't know, right? So with
Mhm,
all of
mhm.
those things at the same time, and I think that's why it stuck.
I think that captures the spirit of the collection so well. So I appreciate you elaborating on that. It also makes me think of my grandmother who lives in East Oakland.
Okay,
And this is the woman that goes out, I'm not going to say every day, but very quite often to go sweep the street.
there it is.
She'll sweep the sidewalk, or
There
she'll
it is.
sweep the street.
I go all the
And
way down past her path on the other
yeah,
side.
and I would for the longest time I was just like, Granny, why are you sweeping the street? And what my grandmother would say was, just because we live in the ghetto don't mean we gotta look like it.
Come on, listen,
uh
tell us now.
yeah, and and she kept that place clean, and it was
Yeah,
so. I love. I mean, I think another reason I was gravitated toward this book is I love grandmothers.
yeah.
I love the kind of wisdom that they have, and I love my grandmother specifically. She's a really great woman. The other interesting thing about my grandmother that I always think about, she grows a cotton plant on her fence. And I remember that's another thing about my grandmother. I just remember being so struck by. I was like,
Yeah,
why
why a
would you
cotton
grow a
plant? Right,
cotton
why are
plant?
you growing bowls of cotton? But she was
And
like, "Listen, this mine."
and you know what her answer really was, because I have the seeds and I know how to do it.
That's right.
And I was like,
Yeah.
wow, how simple that is. She could take care of a thing, and she did. Something else that really interests me about this collection is there's an emphasis on both archival work and the work of transgenerational empathy, if we can call it that.
Yeah.
And you're writing these poems from the viewpoints, or the time around these two different women in your family tree,
Mhm.
and the way their stories parallel and show up in the book is so really well done. And so before I get too far into it, I was wondering if you could just like explain a little bit more about the book's background and the woman who bookmarked these sections, especially for people who haven't had the chance to read it yet.
Sure. Thank you for all those kind words about the book and its construction too, because
Hmm.
that's, a different thing. The poems are one
Hmm.
thing, the makeup is another. And so, my two grandmothers of mine, my third great grandmother, paternal, many folks, and my maternal grandmother, Mary Knight, were both in Petersburg, Virginia, within 1 mile of each other in 1941. They didn't know each other, these families weren't connected. And when I found out that they were within 1 mile of each other, it was just a little bit too much for my poet heart to take.
Yeah.
I those kind of coincidences, and you see I'm putting quotes
Hmm.
around them because whether they are or not, those things you don't walk away from as a poet. You find out the why, the how,
Hmm.
and then where that leads us, right? And so I wanted to write Minnie's story. Minnie was in Petersburg because she had lived there most of her life, in Chesterfield County. She was born enslaved in 1859 and was interviewed for the WPA slave narratives in 1937 and stayed in Petersburg until she passed away in 1945. My maternal grandmother, Mary Knight, was on the opposite end of her life, very young when she was in Petersburg. She was only 18 years old. She had just birthed her first child, and postpartum was an ongoing mystery then. So she was taken to the Central Lunatic Asylum for the Negro Insane, which was in Petersburg in 1941, 9 days after she had birthed her first child. So that's how they ended up being only within a mile of each other. Many lived only about a mile away from the path to the asylum, which is now Central State Hospital, still in existence. And so I wrote their two stories because they lived fairly ordinary lives with extraordinary circumstances. So I wrote Minnie's section, Mary's section, and then kind of wrote through the historical and personal that leads us to today.
Right. And I mean, that's what the strength of the archive, right? Is where you get to weave those things in, like the
Ab-
personal, our personal daily lives are not exempt from history.
Oh no.
Um, and so it's really wonderful. I mean, getting to see this work, and there's this collapsing of that distance of that mile, but there's also this great expansion, right? And it's this
Mm,
expansion through history.
mm,
Since we have this feeling that time and space are not they're not finite, right? Especially in the work of poetry, like the beautiful work of this book,
mm,
is that those circumstances and those things that we're talking about in 1941, they
mm.
come back to speak to us now in 2025, however we may need to receive them. So I thought that was really wonderful. What was the experience for you writing from the place of these two women? I don't know, your own personal relationship to these grandmothers beforehand,
Yeah.
but just what was the experience of writing from this place?
Yeah, so, I decided early on that these were going to be persona poems for the most part. So I would write them in the voices of both my grandmothers. And Minnie, of course, passed away in 1945. So I,
Mhm.
came about 40 years after Minnie had already left this earth. But my paternal grandmother, the other person that the book is dedicated to, is still alive, Shirley Bingham, up in New Jersey. She will be listening to this.
Hi,
Anything that I
Shirley.
do, she makes sure she's on it. Yeah, hey, man. And Minnie was her great grandmother. She was born in Minnie's bed. She remembered Minnie from the time that she was like 5 or 6. So she became my intercessor in many ways for Minnie. My other grandmother, Mary Knight, I was holding her hand when she passed away in 2006. So these were, this was a grandmother that I was deeply close to. I'm the 15th of 15 grandchildren. My mother's the youngest child of hers. So we were extremely close. So her voice was a whole lot easier for me to capture because I knew it and I still hear it all the doggone time.
Mm,
Right. But that did not make it an easy path to write
right.
their voices. Because like you said, I love, no one has talked about, kind of the expansion of the mile beyond that space. That was a
Mm,
beautiful way to put that, Diesel. And so what you don't think about is you're doing certainly historical work. I'm doing archival research, and that research, for lack of a better term, is very cold, right?
yeah.
It's,
Hmm.
you're looking at ledgers, you're looking at text, you're looking at microfiche, if anybody remembers microfiche. You're looking at all of these different things that are absolutely the person is left out of those things. And when you try to bring those things to voice, especially things like children passing, the difficulties that they had to recall in their lives, and then you're doing it in their voice.
Hmm.
I have never cried so much writing a book in all my life, right? Because
Wow.
you absolutely start to embody some of the trauma that they had to endure. And it teaches you a lot about yourself. But also, I think one of the things that it reminded me of very early on as I wrote these very difficult poems was that a book like this also has to be filled with beauty inside and out.
Mm.
Because I knew it had to start in trauma. There was no way around it, but we were going to end with them living out their 84 years, both lived to 84, and teaching us how to be happy despite. So that was, kind of the goal of the collection overall.
That's it makes me think of the work of Witness, right? The work of these persona poems.
Mhm.
Um, there was a long time where I had this moral dilemma of thinking about how to approach poems about other people, people that I love, or people, within the Black community, because I had felt that I got to a point where it was wrong of me only to write about the bad things that had happened to
Mhm.
us, right? Or that were happening to us. And, I wasn't doing the proper work of honoring the people who came before us by honoring the lives they lived and how they had them and how we live happily in this world,
Yes.
despite the things that happened to us. So I really appreciate you, talking about that, the need for both, right? It's not just
Yes.
about these things that we went through, but also how we survived them, right? And how
Yeah.
we get through them. I want to go back for a moment to this note on the archive that I
Uh-huh.
know you're working with so much in this book. And this book is so intentional about the sources that it's including and that it uses, and that's used as inspiration for several of the poems.
Yeah.
Why did you feel that those were foundational to the grounding or understanding of this work? I mean, as far as it being a very personal work, the ones that you included that weren't necessarily about your grandmother's,
Yeah.
why were they so grounding for this work?
I mean, there's a number of reasons. Thank you for reading that closely. I'm a poet that turns to the notes pages and the acknowledgments first and everything.
Same.
Right. I
Yeah.
think, now I ain't lumping you into my category, but I think it's just because I'm nosy, and that's fine.
Hmm.
It makes me, to know many things.
Hmm.
But, that for me is really important. Also, I love a bibliography. I knew when I started embarking on this book, and I have to give a shout out to Wesleyan University Press that published the book, because I knew I could trust them with this text, because they had done some really brilliant work beforehand. One of the books that comes before it, and that in many ways is a precursor to what Room Swept Home was able to do, is Honoré Fernand Jeffers' The Age of Phyllis, which is a book of historical archival research poems about Phyllis Wheatley Peters, but also has a thick bibliography in the back of the book. And you don't see that in most poetry. And it was important for me to at least have a selected bibliography and to make meticulous notes about which part of the archive, whether they be personal, whether they be historical, whether the images in the book, there are family photographs and historical photographs. So we needed to offset those. And I thought they all helped tell the story of these two women and of the country, right? Where it was in 1859 all the way to where it sits right now, the muck of us in the moment. And so it was really important for me to have all of those notes and archival pieces there, so people could trace their own path, right? Not just their own path family-wise. I would love if people were doing ethnographic research and archival research and doing genealogical research. That's there too. But really, if you don't believe me, go look.
Yeah. I was so impressed by the bibliography because, like you were saying, I don't think I had read a book before that had one, and I was like, "Oh, poets can be scholars.
We can do this.
We can do this."
Absolutely.
And I mean, it's not that we're not scholars, but it's such a great reminder that there's real work going. Like we're not just, we're not just woo 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 writing poetry.
Thank you. And that's what people think. They're like, "Oh, you put some butterflies and you talked about how they felt." Baby, no.
Yeah,
What
it's
I
real
did
work.
10 years of work.
Right, exactly,
Yeah.
right. And it's deep, intentional, focus work, right? Like the ability for you to distill these things that you're reading. Because here's the thing, people don't want to read.
Right.
People don't want to go and read,
That's
and so
my work at the university where I am now, it's teaching faculty how to integrate critical reading. So if I was doing a book like this and not doing the critical reading work and not leaving a pen, I'd just be a hypocrite. So I don't want anybody to call me on my stuff.
No, I mean it's such a good inspiration because we have to be able to. The beauty of it is that it takes those things that other people aren't reading is to be able to distill the feeling of it, right? And that's the core of the poetry is it distills the feeling, the anger or the fear or the life that's there. It does that so well. In this book, you
contextualizes things. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
it does not do that.
Right, and it's up to us as the people putting it together, to frame it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In this book, you go through a lot of different forms, and I say forms broadly. I don't just mean received or given forms. I also mean you do a lot of kind of novel things in this book. And so I was wondering, is there any form in here that you enjoyed doing the most, or if there was any that gave you a hard challenge?
Oh, what a good question. It might be the same. Listen, so there is a crown of sonnets in the book.
Yes, to lose your mother.
Thank you. And Lose Your Mother, talking about like brilliant folks, Sadia Hartman, brilliant writer, scholar, thinker. Her book Lose Your Mother is about her tracing the path back to the continent, and thinking about what Blackness means in the diaspora, kind of larger. And I started reading it, and I was just so blown away that I just started highlighting like almost every line. I realized this could be an epigraph, and so all of those titles ended up being epigraphs from Lose Your Mother, and kind of traced my path through my grandmother's back to the present. And I absolutely did not want to write a crown of sonnets. I was real mad when that crown of started appearing. I love the sonnet. It's one of my favorite forms. It comes up in so many different ways here, but I was not enamored with writing so many of them. And then there's another, it ends with Sadia's Cento, which is made up of the line that I use. So it's like a crown of sonnets plus one. So
yeah,
and that it took me so long to kind of write those poems and to make those poems different from each other and to build on different parts of my understanding of who I was and how I was tracing my path through these women's lives. But I think it just couldn't have been any other way. There had to be real connective tissue there. And I think the forum was the perfect space for that work. Now, was it
Yeah.
hard? Yep.
I think when I read it originally, I thought it was a heroic sonnet,
Yeah.
or a heroic crown, and I think it
Yeah.
is still pretty close to that.
Close. Yeah.
If I'm not going to discount it because it's
Close,
still much
right?
harder than anything I've done. To write a collection of sonnets is daunting, and I think what's interesting to me about these sonnets and what you did is that they're not all written the same.
Oh no,
Right,
yeah.
like you have one in the beginning here that's like a contrapuntal. The first
Yeah.
part of that suite is a contrapuntal. You have ones that are in tercets. You have
Yeah.
couplets. So even within this constraint of the 14 lines, there's a lot of innovation within the
Yeah.
sonnet, which is another really. And there's one that's like it has these um it's like these monostitches and couplets and things
Yeah.
like that. There's just a lot of interesting stuff happening with the form in this collection or
Because
in
you
this
gotta keep yourself
suite.
interested once you start writing 14 se by the
Yeah.
second straight sonnet, you're like, "Okay, 14 lines, left justified. What else
Right.
we do?" So, yeah, so
Exactly.
it becomes forms on forms. Yeah.
It was great. It was great.
Yeah.
What do you feel like the forms or the expansiveness in the forms of this collection allowed you to accomplish that you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise?
Oh, yeah, I think about this all the time. I was just meeting with a graduate student this morning who's really into, form right now and translation in particular. I'm not on that boat, but, we were talking about form, and I was talking about one of my teachers, Natasha Trethewey, who, is a brilliant formalist,
Hmm.
we all know, not to mention, the sonnet crowns in Native Guard and beyond, but, she when I interviewed her years ago, we talked extensively about form, but she reminded me that form is a way that you can keep the emotional spillage from just taking over. And of course, she's
Mm,
writing about losing her mother and all of these different things, right? So there, I mean, things that could, if you let the tears start, they would never stop. That's what she said
mm,
once. And I was just trying to figure out in this book how I could keep from just banging people over the head with, man, you should have loved these women. You should have cared for these women. And I had to keep finding ways to rein myself in,
mm,
but to do it well, right? Like a sonnet still gives you plenty. If poets know this, we can do a whole lot with 14 structured lines, right? And
mhm.
that means that still leaves me room for expansion beyond it, but doesn't give me time to kind of wail in the way that you might have wanted to emotionally. So I feel like form is a lovely box in many ways, and it really helps me rein in emotion, but be as precise as I possibly can in any given moment, and that's the job of the poet to me. Beauty one, but clarity first.
I appreciate I appreciate a poet's commitment to clarity because I sometimes I need that.
Yeah. And those are the poems and poets that I like to read. I'm not saying that we can't have ambiguity and
Mhm,
lyricism and all of those things, because those are, that's what makes poetry an expansive art. But
mhm.
clarity for me, is first and foremost like what I value as a reader of poems. And also just as an aside, something I was thinking about deeply as I was writing these early poems in this book, neither one of those many did not learn to read until maybe her 70s. Mary, my grandmother, had to leave school in the 6th grade to work the fields with her family. So I thought often about those early poems, if they were standing beside me, would they understand them?
Yeah,
Yeah. And
that's
I owed
important.
it to them to make sure they did.
Well, thank you so much, Rika. This has been such a wonderful conversation. And I would love if you can close this out by reading your eponymous poem.
Sure. So this poem is Room Swept Home. Mama say, Jah holy, house holy, both clean. Keep things in their places. Is disorder ever clean? Preserve the skin alive by soaking. Bathe and lather high and low. Clean. This water in the Chesapeake, the bay, body full and green. All tide swept by heavy row. Clean. The needle's eye and day's work both seamless. Hem and stitching. knife edge sharp, sewn clean. Gristle bones sucked and crushed, teeth mincing meat to red marrow, clean. Sweep, porch steps, no steps, dirt path, pristine. Any small patch of earth we're given, God struck, bare, but so clean.
Thank you all for listening to this episode of Eponymous, a companion segment to the O Word podcast produced by me, D. Sol Carson. If you are interested in Remica's work, there are some links in the Substack post to some poems of hers online. If this book interests you, Remica recommends that you also check out Native Guard by Natasha Trethewey, The Age of Phyllis by Honoré Fanon Jeffers, and Load In 9 Times by Frank X. Walker. The music for O Word and Eponymous is provided by Esoteric Creations. Check them out on Spotify.